Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition, and we're going to talk about running a 1989 Berlin spy game with Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition. So this video is coming as a direct request from a gentleman by the name of Mike, and he is a longtime supporter of the channel. He watches and leaves fantastic comments. I'm very appreciative of Mike, and I probably have 24 followers. It amazes me who consistently leave very supportive comments, and I'm just really thankful for that. And so this is Mike asked, hey, how would you run a 1989 Berlin spy game? And so I'm answering that question. I'm happy to get the question. And if you have questions about how you could handle a real problem in your current game, or how to prepare for a current game, how to prepare for current game, this is please leave it in the comments below. I've done this before. It's always enjoyable. So the 1989, let's talk about this 1989 Berlin spy game. So I've already defined how you would do this as far as attributes, as far as skills, and as far as and also these stat blocks that you would need essentially a pawn, rook, and a queen stat block, essentially opponents at different levels, right? And I think it's really now I will add something here. So how do you deal? So one of the things I said previously is don't change any of the skills in Dungeons & Dragons. They all fit perfectly into a 1989 Berlin spy game, except for Arcana, and I wouldn't even rename it. When the players say, hey, what's Arcana doing on my sheet? You just say, that's a cult, right? Like it's your knowledge of occult books in the modern world, right? By the way, also the weapons that spies would use, James Bond uses a Walther PPK traditionally, right? And so what do you do when you run into those? What do you do when you need to model a Walther PPK? That's right in the DMG, right? So what do you do with things like drive and computer, right? There are no skills that are going to do that. So one, I learned this from Index Card RPG. It's a fantastic game. It's actually, I'd say it's my second favorite game, tabletop role-playing game, next to Dungeons & Dragons. And I run it very little these days. What I do is I buy every single book that Runehammer makes, right? And what I do is I take the best ideas out of those books and I add them directly into my Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition game. And usually the way I do it is magic items, and that's how you should handle driving and computer and any other thing that your spies need to do. Right? And you're like, how do I start making new skills? You do not make new skills. You handle it through magic items, right? And so what you're going to do is, in your game, you're not going to use the term magic item because it doesn't make sense from a Dungeons & Dragons perspective. You're going to say keepsake, okay? And this comes straight out of, they use different words for it in Index Card RPG. But the way there are no skills in Index Card RPG. What they do is you get an object, and that gives you abilities. And it's the same thing. So let's say one of your characters says, hey, I'm going to be a spy, but my main thing is I'm the wheelman, okay? That's, I could fight and I can, do some spying, but what I really excel at is any time, a vehicle's is needed, I'm the wheelman. I can repair, I can acquire, I can drive, right? I'm the wheelman, right? So what do you do for that character? How do you put that into a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition game? Well, what you do is you give them a keepsake, right? And you say, somewhere back at your home, right, which you haven't seen in 3 months because you're on duty, there is a key to a 1967 Mustang. And that key to the 1967 Mustang, that was your mother's. That was your mother's Mustang. It's important to you. You've held it in your hand. It's at that keepsake, and you think about it, and you could feel. And if you close your eyes, you can feel the grooves on that key, right? And that your possession, your ownership of that 1967 Mustang that's sitting in a keepsake box, half a globe away. What that does is that you are going to be able to use your proficiency bonus every time you make any roll that involves driving, right? So driving is going to, that's going to go off of intelligence or dex, your choice. You're going to get that bonus, and you're going to get your proficiency bonus, right? Or you could even say your proficiency bonus +1, right? However you want to handle it. If you want, it depends on how much. And then the same thing, like what do you do with your hacker? Like your 1989 hacker. Well, same thing. You have a keepsake box somewhere, and in there's an old floppy disk, and on that floppy disk is your first copy of Final Fantasy 1, right? Or whatever, and that's what you learn to code on, right? And every time you do anything that involves computers, you get your proficiency +1, right? Or you get your level, right? Your plus your level, however you want to handle it, right? And so this is the way, and that way you're not adding a bunch of crazy unneeded skills. You're just making each character unique and special, right? And you can kit them out on as soon as the game. One of the things I would really encourage you to do is don't spend a lot of time. Like make your stat. The only thing you need to do, the only thing you need to prepare to start this game is write those stat blocks. Write the pawn stat block, the rook stat block, and the queen stat block, and then begin play, right? And as soon as you get on into the game, even when a character is introduced, you're like your character shows up, they pull tight the cuffs on their tuxedo. Who is your character, right? And as soon as they start talking, as soon as I'm the wheelman, you say, okay, well, listen, I want you to add this to your sheet, and you give them the keepsake. You put it right there in place right then, right? And so you're building this world even as you play. And then one of the things is you start from 0 up, right? You start very quickly. You're like, I just made these 3 stats. The DMG already gives us the equipment we need for modern games. The weapons we need for modern games. I didn't need to change any of the attributes. I didn't need to change a single skill except for an asterisk of Arcana equals occult, right? And we're rocking and rolling. We're playing, and I think your players are going to be excited about. The other thing is, how do you run this thing? Well, first of all, you say, when you invite your players, you say, hey, I want to run a 3-session arc, right? And then you build an adventure that's going to last 3 sessions. You let that run. If people are like, that was fun, right? Then you're like, great, right? Thank you for playing. What do you guys want to run now, right? It's important, right? This is important. You have this experimental game, like this 1989 Berlin spy game that you can run in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This is an experiment. You're bringing your players to something unusual, right? If this works well, right, you're like, oh, great. Your first thought might be, oh, hey, I can run another session, right? Or not another session, but another story arc. Slow down, right? One, I think this pawn, rook, queen stat block thing, I've used this before. It works tremendously, and I think your players will see how easy it is to use Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition as a powerful base to run anything, right? And they're like, and I think once they see the pawn, rook, queen, and how smoothly it runs and how fun it is, they might be like, hey, I want to run Stranger Things, right? Or they might be like, hey, I want to run a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game immediately, right? And so it's a fantastic idea to have the 1980 Berlin spy game. By the way, that is just the best time to pick for an espionage game. Like you're 2 years before the collapse of the USSR, and it's perfect. Like there's just going to be so many things to do for a spy. Also, it's 1989, where doing actual spycraft mattered instead of just clicking keyboards, right? It doesn't. There's no point in running an espionage game today. It'd be very, very difficult. It'd be a Superman game. You're always making an excuse for why the villain isn't just destroyed in the first minute. And in a modern espionage game, you'd be like, well, this is a good modern espionage game would be like, what language are you using to pull out database information from XYZ country? And that's not very exciting, right? So basically, but once they see the model that you've played down, before you go to say, hey, I'm going to run my next session of this, check in with your players, right? And see if any of them are excited to say, man, you blew the doors off of that. I want to run a Star Trek game next in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I want to run a Star Wars game. Just, building from zero and having fun every week, using the attributes, using the skills, and then using additional keepsakes or to round out player characters, right? And all the non-player characters are just handled with a pawn, rook, queen template. And that's very non-selfish. It's very inviting. And and the reason why I'm suggesting it is, boy, we got a tiger by the tail with my game. Every dungeon master is every player is a dungeon master, and I'm pretty convinced for a lot of games out there, they would really be very blessed to go to this. I'm starting to think this idea that one dungeon master sits down and takes four players' attention for for 6 sessions if they're like most dungeon masters, or 6 months or 6 years, right, is very old school. And the idea is we really should be sharing the dungeon master seat a lot more. All that's my opinion. I hope this is helpful, Mike. I really appreciate getting this question this week. It was really quite a blessing. Thanks for letting me share my ideas with you, Mike, and I really wish you to have a wonderful weekend and week ahead. Everyone, please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.